So William James drafted his reply to Clifford's The Ethics of Belief, in 1891, right? Or 1887, right? It wasn't fully published until 1891. But anyway, he argues, or James argues, quite contrary to Clifford's own position, that there are cases where we are allowed to believe or disbelieve um, against, or not against evidence, but we're allowed to believe or disbelieve. We're allowed for agnosticism, functionally, where the following features, in cases where the following features are present, right? So the case is ambiguous. That is to say, the evidence is equally weighted, or at least apparently equally weighted, towards both, belief for the divine or belief against the divine, and so on and so forth, or where the notion of evidence, Clifford's own notion of evidence, is too strict, and thus we can't rely on evidence, right? Where intuition or reason have to be the basis of our thinking. Right? The complete absence of evidence is not necessarily, though often it is the case, it is not necessarily so that such a complete absence of evidence means an absence of the thing itself, right? And this is something that James argues, and he points to many scientific discoveries, right? Specifically, like, imagine paleontology, right? Uncovering dinosaurs, right? Or dinosaur bones. Prior to uncovering dinosaur bones, we had no evidence for them, right? That's not to say the evidence isn't there, but simply that we had no evidence, right? That also is not to say that the bones weren't there, and that therefore the evidence of dinosaurs wasn't there, right? But if we had the concept of dinosaurs, absent that evidence, that's something that we would have to take on faith alone, right? We would have to have the will to believe. Giant lizards roamed the earth before humankind, right? That would be the claim. Well, where's your evidence for that? I don't have any. There is none, right? Prior to digging up actual dinosaur bones, there is none. All right, so then why should I believe it? Why should you disbelieve it, right? It's something of the argument. It's a bit more complex than that, but it gives you an idea, at least, of how this works. So the cases are ambiguous. There's equal evidence for and against, or the utter lack of evidence is not itself, an argument against the existence of something, right? Necessarily. It oftentimes is, but it's not necessarily the case. So the choice to believe must be live, right? So it is live. This means that it must be psychologically possible in a sustainable long-term belief. The belief that dinosaurs exist, absent any evidence that there were such a thing as dinosaurs, right? You have to be able to believe that in the for the long haul. It's not something that you just believe and then disbelieve, believe and then disbelieve. That you can't maintain a firm grasp of the belief, right? The choice must also be forced. So you must either believe or disbelieve, right? There can't be sort of a middle ground or a third option, involved, right? So it's not like who do you think it's not like the belief of who you think your friend is going to should go out with, where there's multiple options, including no one, right? Um, it's got to be an either or, a dichotomous sort of situation. And in reality, not many of our beliefs are honestly dichotomous, right? There's a lot of nuance and uh, shades of gray to many of our beliefs. So that also narrows down to a degree the number of things that fall under this category of willed belief. And then finally, the choice is momentous. It must have an impact on your being and how you act, right? How you live your life. So that is to say, if you believe one way or the other, it affects uh, certain other elements of your life in a meaningful and impactful way. If you believe that God exists, you tend to live by a certain a set of moral principles that are guided by that belief and connected other beliefs. Right? The belief that God exists leads to belief in leads to other sets of beliefs that come along with it, and that leads to that leaves an impact on the very way that you live out your life. The same thing with if you don't believe God exists, right? Um, right, it has an impact. Namely that you're not guided by those beliefs that follow, but not necessarily that you don't live your life in a similar or in a certain way. Right, you can still live a life guided by kindness and humanity, a humanitarian life, uh, instead of one guided by the desire or seeking to get into the kingdom of heaven. Right. Now, one of the very basic objections to all of this is a quite straightforward one, and it's, uh, well, what constitutes belief? All right, belief is a very open-ended idea or concept. Uh, right, so what is a belief? Is the belief that um, is a belief something you know that is uh, brief, or can it be can a belief be brief and at all? Can it be something that just passes through the mind? A thought, is a thought a belief, or is a thought something separate from a belief? Right? Um, and what makes a belief consistently sustainable? Right. That's a very nebulous criteria, and it's very, very open-ended and ill-defined. So one of the problems with James's reply is that where Clifford's strong rationalism is very, very narrow, perhaps too strict, uh, because that form of strong rationalism would preclude any scientific theory, any new scientific theory for which there wasn't a preponderance of data for already. And for which we didn't know exactly how to test. Right? And that's one of the things about science itself also, is that, experimentation is also experimentation with the way that we do experimentation, right? In order to find the best way to collect data. Right? So perhaps Clifford's form is too strict, but James's model of belief is so broad, right, that it could allow for potentially not any beliefs, but many, many different forms of belief, right? It's perhaps too broad, right? It catches too many flies in its web, such that the web starts to bow under the weight of it, right? So it's not a bad model, but perhaps it's too open. if we could refine it somewhat, it would be a lot better. But one of the things about this is, while both are written with the possibility of religious belief in mind, or directly with religious belief in mind, they don't directly address what it means to have religious belief. And this is something that our last thinker, Blaise Pascal, actually does.